The battlefield stretched endlessly, a wasteland of charred earth and shattered steel. Above, the sky churned with unnatural hues, swirling greens and purples that seemed to pulse with malice. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning metal and something else, something organic and alien, like the scent of rot mixed with ozone. Smoke billowed in great plumes, obscuring the horizon where streaks of crimson lightning flashed intermittently, as though the heavens themselves were enraged by the carnage below. In the center of it all stood the alien queen, her towering form a grotesque blend of elegance and terror. Her body shimmered with an iridescent sheen, each scale catching the distorted light like liquid metal. Her elongated limbs moved with fluid grace, yet every step radiated power and menace. She loomed over the battlefield, her presence commanding both awe and dread. Her eyes glowed with an inner fire, twin orbs of molten gold that seemed to pierce through the chaos around her, scanning for weakness or opportunity. But despite her imposing figure, there was a tension in her movements, a subtle hesitation betraying the strain beneath her regal facade. The war had not gone according to plan. For centuries, her kind had been unstoppable, their hive spreading across galaxies like a relentless tide. Yet here, on this desolate planet at the edge of known space, they faced resistance unlike anything they had ever encountered. The human forces, though vastly outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a ferocity that defied logic. Their strategies were unpredictable, their resolve unshakable. And now, after months of relentless combat, cracks were beginning to show in the Queen's once impenetrable dominance. Her warriors, usually unwavering in their loyalty, faltered under the weight of mounting losses. Even her most elite units, the ones bred specifically for conquest, were breaking ranks, their instincts overwhelmed by fear. The humans had turned the terrain itself into a weapon, using guerrilla tactics and traps to whittle away at her numbers. Every victory came at a cost, and those costs were piling up faster than she could replenish her ranks. The Queen's claws flexed involuntarily, scraping against the ground as if seeking purchase in the shifting sands of uncertainty. Around her, the remnants of her army swarmed like insects, their chittering cries mingling with the distant roar of explosions. Some carried wounded comrades back to safety, others scavenged weapons and supplies from fallen foes. Despite their efforts, despair hung heavy in the air, a palpable force that even the Queen could feel pressing against her consciousness. It was not just the physical toll of the war, it was the psychological one. This fight was sapping more than resources. It was eroding morale, fracturing unity, and testing the very essence of what made her species so formidable. For the first time in millennia, doubt flickered in the alien Queen's mind. Not outright fear, that emotion was foreign to her, but a gnawing sense of vulnerability. Was this how empires fell? With a single misstep, a miscalculation, a moment of hubris? She had underestimated the humans, dismissed them as mere pests to be exterminated. Now, surrounded by the smoking ruins of her ambitions, she realized the magnitude of her error. These creatures were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something deeper, something primal and unyielding. They called it hope. And hope, she understood now, was a dangerous adversary. The crowd gathered in the shadow of the crumbling fortress walls, their faces etched with exhaustion and desperation. Soldiers mingled with civilians, their uniforms torn and stained, their expressions haunted but determined. The din of whispered conversations filled the air, punctuated by the occasional wail of a child or the sharp bark of orders being shouted nearby. Fires burned sporadically throughout the encampment, casting flickering light over makeshift shelters and piles of salvaged equipment. It was a scene of organized chaos, born from necessity rather than design. Among them stood Kale, his tall frame draped in a tattered cloak that did little to shield him from the biting wind. His dark hair was matted with sweat and grime, strands clinging to his forehead as he leaned against a battered crate, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He watched the activity around him with sharp, calculating eyes, taking note of every detail, the way medics tended to the wounded with trembling hands, the grim resignation etched into the faces of seasoned fighters, the nervous energy of fresh recruits clutching rifles too large for their frames. Though he blended seamlessly into the throng, there was an aura about him that set him apart, a quiet intensity that drew attention without demanding it. Kale had always been a man of action, someone who led by example rather than words. Born on a frontier colony world ravaged by resource scarcity and constant conflict, he'd learned early on that survival required more than strength. It demanded adaptability, cunning, and an unrelenting will to endure. Those qualities had earned him respect among his peers, though few truly knew him beyond his reputation as a skilled warrior. To most, he was simply another soldier, hardened by years of battle and driven by the same cause that united them all, the defense of humanity's last bastion against extinction. But beneath that stoic exterior lay layers of complexity. Kale carried scars not only on his skin but also within his soul. The loss of his family during a surprise raid when he was young had left an indelible mark, shaping him into someone who understood pain intimately yet refused to let it define him. Instead, he channeled it into purpose, vowing never to allow such devastation to happen again, not to anyone else. That promise fueled his actions, guiding him through countless skirmishes where others might have faltered. As he surveyed the gathering before him, Kale felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just another battle. It was the culmination of everything they had fought for. Failure here meant annihilation, not just for him, but for everyone. The thought gnawed at him, stirring memories of battles won and lost, friends buried under hasty graves, promises broken because survival often demanded sacrifice. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. There would be time for reflection later, if there was a later. A sudden commotion near the front of the crowd snapped him out of his reverie. A group of officers pushed their way through, their voices raised in urgent debate. One of them gestured wildly toward the horizon, where the faint outline of enemy forces could be seen advancing steadily closer. Panic rippled through the assembly, a collective intake of breath followed by hurried whispers. Someone shouted for order, but the noise only grew louder, a cacophony of fear and defiance. Kale straightened, instinctively reaching for the hilt of his blade strapped to his side. The movement was automatic, born of years spent preparing for moments exactly like this. His fingers brushed against the worn leather grip, drawing reassurance from its familiar texture. He scanned the crowd again, searching for signs of leadership, for someone to step forward and rally these people. But no one emerged. The officers continued arguing amongst themselves, their authority undermined by indecision. It was then that something shifted inside Kale. A spark ignited deep within his chest, a flame that had smoldered quietly for years suddenly roaring to life. He didn't know why or how, but he felt it, the undeniable certainty that this was his moment. Not because he sought glory or recognition, but because he couldn't stand idly by while others floundered. This wasn't about him, it was about them. About all of them. Without fully realizing what he was doing, Kale began moving, weaving through the press of bodies until he reached the edge of the central clearing. His boots crunched against the dirt, the sound barely audible over the din. When he finally stopped, standing slightly elevated on a pile of rubble, he hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, raising his voice above the clamor, he spoke. "We've come too far," he said, his tone steady but resonant, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Too many lives have been lost. Too much has been sacrificed. We can't afford to falter now." The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished, yet imbued with a conviction that silenced the crowd almost instantly. Heads turned toward him, eyes wide with curiosity, apprehension, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone was speaking not as a commander or politician, but as one of them, one who understood their pain, their fear, their determination. Kale took a step forward, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. "They think we're broken," he continued, his voice growing firmer. "They think we're weak. But they don't know us. They don't know what we're capable of when we stand together. When we fight not just for ourselves, but for each other." His words struck a chord, igniting murmurs of agreement that spread like wildfire. People began nodding, some whispering encouragement to those beside them. Kale felt the momentum building, feeding off the collective energy of the crowd. He pressed on, his voice rising with urgency. "We've been pushed to the brink, but we're still here. Still standing. And if we fall today, let it be while fighting, not while waiting for someone else to save us. Let it be on our terms." By now, the entire assembly was focused on him, their earlier panic replaced by a fragile sense of resolve. Among them, a young woman holding a child clutched her companion's arm, tears streaming down her face but her expression resolute. Nearby, an older man adjusted his rifle strap, his weathered hands steadier than they had been moments ago. Even the arguing officers had fallen silent, watching Kale with a mixture of surprise and admiration. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Then, with a finality that echoed through the gathering, he declared, "If we're going to die, let's make sure they remember why they shouldn't have messed with us." A cheer erupted from the crowd, tentative at first but quickly swelling into a thunderous roar. Fists pumped into the air, chants of defiance ringing out as the people embraced the spark Kale had ignited. In that moment, he wasn't just another soldier. He was a symbol, a catalyst for something greater than himself. And as he stepped down from the rubble, ready to lead them into whatever lay ahead, he knew there was no turning back. The Queen's fury was a storm unleashed, a tempest of rage and frustration that tore through the battlefield with devastating precision. Her massive tail lashed out, cleaving through ranks of armored vehicles as though they were made of paper. Soldiers scrambled to evade her wrath, their disciplined formations dissolving into chaos as she advanced. Her claws dripped with molten metal, the heat radiating from her strikes searing the air and setting ablaze anything unfortunate enough to be caught in her wake. Kale, amidst the swirling pandemonium, found himself face to face with this embodiment of destruction. He had anticipated the Queen's assault, positioning himself strategically behind a barricade of overturned tanks. As her shadow engulfed the area, he tightened his grip on his plasma rifle, the cool metal reassuring against his palm. The weapon hummed softly, charged and ready. Taking a deep breath, Kale leaned out, aiming carefully at the exposed joint of her forelimb, a vulnerable spot identified by their reconnaissance teams. The shot rang out, a piercing beam of concentrated energy that struck true. The Queen recoiled, her ear-splitting screech reverberating across the battlefield. The impact caused her to stumble momentarily, her immense bulk crashing into a derelict building, sending debris cascading onto the ground below. Kale seized the moment, signaling to his squad to advance. They moved swiftly, a coordinated unit weaving through the wreckage, firing continuous bursts at the Queen's weakened flank. Yet, for every blow they landed, the Queen retaliated with twice the ferocity. Her tail swept across the ground, obliterating barriers and scattering troops like leaves in a gale. Kale dove behind a chunk of concrete just as a wave of kinetic force surged past, the shock wave knocking the wind from his lungs. Gritting his teeth, he rolled onto his feet, assessing the situation. The Queen's resilience was terrifying. Even injured, she remained a formidable foe, her movements fluid and calculated. Realizing brute force alone wouldn't suffice, Kale switched tactics. He activated his communicator, barking orders to deploy the EMP grenades strategically placed around the perimeter. The grenades detonated in rapid succession, pulses of electromagnetic energy crackling through the air. The Queen convulsed, her systems momentarily disrupted. Her glowing eyes dimmed, and her graceful strides faltered, giving the human forces a crucial window of opportunity. Seizing the advantage, Kale sprinted forward, dodging falling debris and returning fire with relentless determination. His squad followed suit, their combined firepower driving the Queen further back. Each step they took towards her felt like a monumental achievement, a testament to their unyielding spirit. Yet, Kale knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The Queen was far from defeated, her recovery imminent as her alien physiology adapted to the EMP interference. As the initial effects of the grenades began to wane, the Queen regained her composure, her golden eyes reigniting with renewed intensity. With a roar that shook the very earth, she launched herself into the fray once more, her attacks more savage and unpredictable. Kale narrowly avoided a swipe of her claw, feeling the rush of displaced air as it grazed past him. He stumbled, regaining his footing just in time to see a fellow soldier fall victim to her lethal strike. Fury and grief surged within Kale, fueling his resolve. He couldn't afford to falter, not when so many depended on him. Summoning every ounce of courage, he rallied his team, coordinating a series of diversionary assaults designed to keep the Queen off balance. The battlefield became a blur of motion and sound, a symphony of destruction and defiance. Through it all, Kale remained steadfast, his vision clear despite the chaos enveloping him. With each clash, the line between victory and defeat blurred. The Queen's power was undeniable, her presence a constant reminder of the odds stacked against them. Yet, Kale held on to the belief that even the mightiest adversaries could be overcome. It was a belief forged in the fires of countless battles, tempered by the sacrifices of those who stood beside him. And as he prepared for what might be the final confrontation, Kale vowed to honor their memory, no matter the outcome. The alien queen reared back, her massive form silhouetted against the chaotic sky as tendrils of smoke curled around her like spectral serpents. Her golden eyes narrowed, fixing Kale with a gaze that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone, probing the depths of his resolve. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to freeze, the cacophony of battle fading into a deafening silence. It was as though the universe itself held its breath, waiting to see what would unfold next. Kale stood his ground, his chest heaving with exertion but his stance unyielding. Around him, the remnants of his squad regrouped, their faces etched with determination tinged with desperation. They had fought valiantly, but the cost had been immense, too many lives lost, too much ground given up. The queen's voice erupted then, not as a roar but as a chilling resonance that vibrated in the very marrow of their bones. It wasn't speech, not in any language they could comprehend, yet it carried meaning all the same, an acknowledgement of Kale's defiance, a challenge issued not just to him but to the entirety of humanity. The message was clear: surrender or perish. Her tail lashed out again, carving a trench into the earth as if underscoring her ultimatum. Yet, instead of instilling fear, the gesture ignited something unexpected in Kale, a flicker of understanding. He realized then that the queen, for all her power and majesty, was not invincible. Her movements, though still fluid, betrayed a weariness that hadn't been there before. The wounds inflicted by the EMP grenades and their relentless attacks had taken their toll. More importantly, her arrogance, once an impenetrable shield, now revealed cracks. She had underestimated them, just as they had underestimated her at the start of this war. And in that shared flaw, Kale saw an opportunity, not just to survive, but to turn the tide entirely. Summoning every ounce of courage, Kale stepped forward, raising his voice above the din. "You think you know us?" he shouted, his words raw and unfiltered, echoing across the battlefield. "You think you understand what drives us, what makes us fight even when hope seems impossible. But you don't. You never did." His voice cracked with emotion, but he didn't falter. "We are more than your prey. We are more than your conquest. We are the sum of every loss, every sacrifice, every dream we refuse to let die." The queen tilted her head, her luminous eyes narrowing further as if processing his words, or perhaps mocking them. But Kale pressed on, undeterred. "This isn't just about winning or losing. It's about proving that no matter how strong you are, no matter how many worlds you've conquered, you can't break us. Because we're not fighting for territory or power. We're fighting for each other. For the future. For the chance to live free." Behind him, the surviving soldiers began to murmur, their voices rising in agreement. The sentiment spread like wildfire, reigniting the spark of defiance that had brought them this far. Even those who had been on the verge of collapse found new strength in Kale's words. They tightened their grips on their weapons, their postures straightening as they prepared for one final push. The queen let out another guttural cry, her tail whipping through the air with lethal speed. But this time, Kale didn't flinch. Instead, he met her gaze head-on, his own eyes blazing with a fire that matched hers. "Come on, then," he roared, his voice carrying a mix of fury and desperation. "Show me what you've got left. Show me if you're willing to pay the price for your arrogance." For a moment, the battlefield hung in precarious balance. The queen hesitated, her massive frame trembling, not from injury, but from something deeper. Doubt. Uncertainty. Perhaps even a flicker of respect. And in that instant, Kale knew they had her. They weren't just fighting a war anymore. They were dismantling the myth of her invincibility, piece by piece. With a rallying cry that sent shivers down the spines of friend and foe alike, Kale charged forward, his squad following close behind. The final chapter of this battle was about to begin, and neither side would emerge unchanged. The queen's response was instantaneous and ferocious, her tail lashing out with such force that it cleaved the ground beneath Kale's feet. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding being crushed as chunks of earth and debris flew in every direction. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the battlefield, knocking several soldiers off their feet. Yet, even amidst the chaos, Kale's resolve only hardened. His heart pounded like a war drum, each beat pushing him forward despite the overwhelming odds. He rolled to his knees, raising his rifle and firing a concentrated burst at the exposed underside of her thorax. The plasma round sizzled against her armored hide, leaving scorch marks but failing to penetrate. Still, the attack enraged her further, her golden eyes flaring brighter as she let out a deafening shriek. The sound reverberated through the air, shaking loose fragments from crumbling structures and sending waves of terror coursing through those who heard it. But instead of retreating, Kale pressed on, his movements fueled by adrenaline and sheer willpower. "Keep moving!" he barked over his shoulder, his voice cutting through the din. His squad obeyed without hesitation, weaving through the wreckage with practiced precision. They unleashed a barrage of firepower, targeting weak points identified during earlier skirmishes. Each shot struck true, chipping away at the Queen's defenses, but she retaliated with equal ferocity. Her claws raked across the ground, scattering soldiers like leaves in a storm. One of Kale's comrades went down, clutching a grievous wound, but others quickly pulled him to safety while maintaining the assault. Kale ducked behind a jagged piece of wreckage, reloading his weapon with trembling hands. His breaths came in ragged gasps, his body screaming for respite, but he refused to yield. As he peered around the edge of his cover, he caught sight of something, a faint glimmer along the seam where her carapace met her abdomen. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it represented a vulnerability. A chance. "Target her midsection," Kale shouted, his voice raw with urgency. "Focus all fire there." His squad responded immediately, adjusting their aim and unleashing a relentless volley of plasma bolts. The Queen recoiled, her massive frame shuddering under the concentrated assault. For the first time since the battle began, she showed signs of genuine distress. Her movements became erratic, less calculated, as pain and exhaustion started to take their toll. Yet, even wounded, she remained a formidable adversary, lashing out with renewed savagery. A soldier beside Kale fell victim to one of her strikes, his cry cut short as he was hurled into the air like a rag doll. Grief surged within Kale, but there was no time to mourn. He pushed forward, closing the distance between himself and the Queen with reckless abandon. Every step felt heavier than the last, his legs burning with exertion, but he couldn't afford to stop, not now, not when they were so close. As he approached, he noticed something else. The alien warriors surrounding the Queen had begun to falter. Their usual coordination was breaking down, replaced by confusion and disarray. Some hesitated, their instincts torn between loyalty to their Queen and self-preservation. Others fled outright, abandoning the fight altogether. The tide was shifting, however slightly, and Kale seized upon it with everything he had. "We're doing it!" someone shouted from behind him, their voice filled with desperate hope. "She's weakening." Kale didn't dare look back. His focus remained locked on the Queen. Summoning every ounce of strength, he sprinted toward her, dodging her flailing limbs and leaping over debris. When he reached the base of her towering form, he planted his feet firmly, aiming his rifle upward at the vulnerable seam. With a roar that matched hers in intensity, he fired repeatedly, each shot finding its mark. The Queen reared back, her scream piercing the heavens as smoke began to rise from the damaged area. But just as victory seemed within reach, disaster struck. One of her massive claws slammed into the ground mere inches from Kale, sending him sprawling. His rifle skittered out of reach, leaving him defenseless. Pain exploded across his ribs as he hit the dirt hard, his vision swimming. Through the haze, he saw her looming above him, her golden eyes blazing with fury and something else, recognition. "You," she hissed, her voice low and guttural, carrying a strange mix of hatred and begrudging respect. "You insignificant speck. You dare." Kale gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand despite the agony coursing through his body. Blood trickled down his temple, mixing with sweat and grime, but his gaze never wavered. "Yeah," he spat, defiance etched into every syllable. "I dare." For a moment, they stood locked in a silent standoff, predator and prey facing one another in a dance as old as time itself. Then, with a suddenness that defied logic, the Queen lunged, her jaws snapping shut mere inches from Kale's face. He stumbled backward, tripping over rubble and landing hard on his back. Desperation clawed at him as he scrambled for anything, a weapon, a rock, anything, to defend himself. And then, salvation arrived in the most unexpected form. From the corner of his eye, Kale saw movement, a flash of silver slicing through the air. A blade whistled past him, embedding itself deep into the queen's forearm. She roared in pain, momentarily distracted as she turned to confront this new threat. Kale twisted his head to see who had thrown the weapon and found himself staring at an unlikely ally, a young woman from the crowd, her face streaked with dirt and determination. In her hands, she held another makeshift weapon, ready to throw if needed. The distraction gave Kale precious seconds to recover. He grabbed a discarded energy pistol from the ground, scrambling to his feet as the queen refocused on him. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Soldiers poured in from all sides, converging on the queen with a ferocity born of desperation and unity. Together, they formed a wall of resistance, their combined efforts slowly driving her back. Yet, even as the tide turned in their favor, Kale knew the fight was far from over. The queen might be wounded, but she was far from defeated. Her eyes burned with an unrelenting hunger, her claws twitching with barely contained rage. And beyond her, the remnants of her army regrouped, preparing for one final, desperate push. The battlefield teetered on the brink of collapse, both literally and figuratively. Structures groaned under the strain of repeated impacts, their skeletal remains swaying precariously before finally succumbing to gravity. Dust clouds billowed skyward, choking the already oppressive atmosphere and obscuring visibility. Amidst this apocalyptic tableau, Kale and his comrades fought with a fervor that bordered on madness, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. The queen, though visibly weakened, continued to lash out with terrifying efficiency. Her movements grew slower, more deliberate, each strike carrying the weight of her dwindling strength. Yet, even in her diminished state, she remained a force to be reckoned with. Her tail swept through the ranks, scattering soldiers like leaves caught in a gale. Those who managed to evade her wrath returned fire with unwavering determination, their weapons spitting streams of plasma that illuminated the swirling haze. Kale moved with a singular purpose, dodging and weaving through the chaos with an agility honed by years of combat. His mind raced, calculating angles and trajectories, searching for any advantage they could exploit. He spotted a gap in her defenses, a slight misstep as she adjusted her footing, and seized the opportunity. Sprinting forward, he vaulted over a fallen beam and launched himself at her flank, driving his blade deep into the joint connecting her leg to her torso. The queen let out a guttural roar, her body convulsing as she tried to shake him off. Kale clung to her with grim determination, his fingers digging into the slick surface of her carapace. Around him, the battle raged on, the sounds of gunfire and screams blending into a cacophony of destruction. He ignored it all, focusing solely on the task at hand. With a savage twist, he wrenched the blade free, eliciting another pained cry from the queen. But triumph was fleeting. Before he could retreat, her massive claw swung around, catching him squarely in the chest and sending him flying. He landed hard, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs and leaving him gasping for air. Darkness threatened to engulf him, but he fought it back, forcing himself to rise despite the searing pain radiating through his torso. Through blurred vision, he saw her looming above him once more, her golden eyes gleaming with predatory intent. Just as she prepared to deliver what would surely be a fatal blow, a deafening explosion rocked the battlefield. The ground trembled violently, throwing both Kale and the queen off balance. Smoke and flames erupted from the horizon, where human reinforcements had finally breached the perimeter. Tanks rolled in, their turrets swiveling to target the remaining alien forces. Fighter jets screamed overhead, unleashing salvos of missiles that lit up the sky like fireworks. The queen staggered, her attention momentarily diverted as the tide shifted dramatically. Her warriors, already faltering, broke ranks entirely, fleeing in disarray or surrendering outright. For the first time since the war began, the humans held the upper hand. Yet, even amidst the chaos, Kale knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, he staggered to his feet, clutching a discarded grenade launcher. His hands trembled as he loaded the weapon, his vision swimming with exertion. Taking aim, he fired a round directly at the queen's exposed midsection. The explosion sent her reeling, her massive form crashing to the ground with a thunderous impact. Dust and debris enveloped her, obscuring her from view. For a moment, silence descended over the battlefield, broken only by the distant rumble of collapsing ruins and the crackle of fires consuming the landscape. Kale stood motionless, his chest heaving as he waited for the dust to settle. When it did, the queen lay prone, her once majestic form battered and broken. Her golden eyes flickered weakly, dimming with each passing second. Kale approached cautiously, his weapon trained on her. Despite her injuries, she still exuded an aura of menace, her presence commanding even in defeat. As he drew closer, she fixed him with a final, piercing gaze, one that carried a mixture of hatred, respect, and something else he couldn't quite place. Perhaps regret. Or maybe acceptance. "You won't win," she rasped, her voice barely audible over the dying echoes of battle. "This is not the end." Before Kale could respond, her body went limp, her glowing eyes extinguishing like dying stars. The battlefield fell silent, save for the labored breathing of survivors and the distant hum of engines. Victory hung heavy in the air, bitter and sweet. But as Kale stared down at the fallen queen, unease gnawed at him. Her final words lingered in his mind, a chilling reminder that wars were rarely won with a single battle. Whatever came next, humanity would need to be ready, for the queen's legacy, and for whatever horrors awaited them beyond the horizon.